Hey, what's up, guys? This is Carson, and welcome back to another podcast episode. I'm super excited to be bringing you guys a new podcast episode, and I am super excited to be bringing you more in the future. Remember, if you enjoy these, please hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys later. Hello, everyone. My name is Carson, and welcome back to another podcast episode. Today, I have Garry Schyman here with me. He is a very, very influential composer for me personally on my projects and how I approach game scoring. And he is a composer for film, TV, but also video games. And he's done some big games like all the Bioshocks. He's worked on Shadow of War, Shadow of Mordor, and he's also done work on Destroy All Humans and a ton of other projects. I can't even list them all off. But today he is here, and I'm super excited to have this opportunity. So thank you for being here.
Good to be here, Carson.
So you have got to work on a lot of projects, and you've worked on, obviously TV, film stuff. You worked on games, Destroy All Humans, Shadow of War, Shadow of Mordor. But before you start anything during your workday, is there any kind of like routine or anything along those lines that you start to prepare yourself for the workday, like, physically, mentally? And then is there anything that you also do in the morning or whenever you get ready for work, like to warm up ears or anything? Because I know some composers like to do some kind of things to warm their ears up to before they work on music. So I'm wondering if there's anything like that that you do every day.
I have a cup of coffee.
Yeah, yeah.
I do that. That's my drug of choice. I get up fairly early. Maybe 7 a.m. is my generally 6:30 to 7:30. I wake up and have some coffee. I try to take a walk in the morning.
Okay.
For 20 minutes or so, because it's just a good way to kind of clear my head and get some fresh air. And it's a good thing to do. And then, I try to start early if I can. Sometimes I get distracted by emails. It's very easy to get distracted these days, as we know.
It is.
But it's critically important to, force yourself to, I usually quit my email app at a certain point, turn it off, try to keep the internet out of my view, open up my digital workstation, which is an application called Digital Performer, DP, okay. And just start thinking about it and working on it and looking at one key that is very useful is if I can start something the night before, and just look at it and think about what the challenge is and what I need to write. If I can get a few notes down, some ideas. Then starting in the morning is not quite the blank slate. And the blank slate can be a challenge. So having something, anything, even if it's the wrong thing, I've already started it. It's it's really helpful, I find. And then just stick to it. One of the big differences I think between perhaps songwriters who are maybe more inspired, to use the same word twice, is that they don't have the deadlines that we do in film and TV and games. And I've joked, but it's actually true, is that the thing that inspires me is a deadline. If you got to get something written, that just focuses you and you just put your mind to it. And then when that happens, ideas come. So that's the process, and then just keep at it. I do like to quit for a few hours, maybe around 5 or 6, have dinner with my wife, whatever. And then I like to come back to it in the evening, like around 9, and listen to what I did that day and evaluate it with fresh ears. And often have some very valuable insights as to what was good about it, what needs to be messed with and adjusted and changed, and maybe a melodic idea that can be fine-tuned and improved and whatever. So that's quite valuable. And sometimes I'll work as long as I can. Around midnight I start to get tired. And if I'm too tired, I just sit here staring at the screen for too long.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, it's time to quit.
Yeah.
One of the cool things about games versus television and film is that generally, this is not always the case, but generally you have more time. So you're not as like up against the wall. It's like, damn, I have to stay up till 3 in the morning and get this queue done because tomorrow I got more to do. It's like that sort of, especially television is very, very unforgiving in terms of your time.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've heard. I've heard composers talk about how they'll see like the posters of the movie and the release date and everything whenever they're just driving around, and then they're just like, "Oh, I have not actually finished that music. I got to get that done." Um, is there any but going off of that though, whenever you're like out and about, say you're not like, say for example you're like on vacation or something, right? If is there any times like that whenever you can't, write it down in notes or anything that you'll like will you ever like pull out your phone and like voice record anything whenever you're just out and about if an idea comes to you, or if that does happen, is there anything you do to try and capture that idea in the moment?
Yeah, I do. I do have a voice recorder on my phone, and I will sing stuff, even though I don't have a particularly good voice. But I can remind myself because I have had ideas that I hadn't recorded or wrote down or whatever, and then it's like the next day, it's like, oh, what the hell was that? You forget it,
Yeah.
So it's really valuable to write down, and sometimes those are good ideas. More often than not, they're not, but they can be, they can be something, especially I find that's most useful if something is melodic, melody centric. There's such a word or two words, because I can't really sing a harmony. I can't really sing, I can give a rhythm to the melody. So if I have a melodic idea, then I can sing it and then I can work it the next day or whenever I get to it. So yeah, I do that sometimes. Yeah.
Okay. I also had a question about because I'm not going to really talk about it a whole lot, but I also as well have done some game scoring stuff, and it's very different in the indie world when it comes to like what you receive to write to. And I was curious for you, whenever you're working on a project, whenever it's time for you to start writing music for a game, do they send you, I'm assuming it changes on the project, but do they send you like builds of the game that you can play? Do they send you, like a storyboard or anything? Do they send you like gameplay footage to score to? Which one of those do you find is more common, and which one do you prefer to work with out of all those for games?
Well, the most common and what I've gotten used to is someone plays the game at the studio and they do a video capture. And we're talking about gameplay now. If it's a cinematic or a cutscene or whatever, you want to see that. You want to see that
Right.
cutscene, even if the visuals are not finished, and it can and you get so you get stuff that looks really funky, but they're making it, but the timing's locked, and you can see the characters and you can hear all the dialogue. I can score that, but you need that to score to picture. But gameplay, as and perhaps many of the listeners know, it's not scored to picture, meaning you're not catching anything because you don't know how long any two players or any one player will get from point A to point B, and how much how linger, or they get in a fight, how long it takes them to defeat the enemy, or maybe they're defeated and they have to run back, or whatever. I mean, these are all variables that you don't know. So you write music that is often looped and other, techniques that goes on and doesn't necessarily catch anything. So the gameplay video that you're provided is not, you're not scoring to that specific picture. That's just giving you what the world looks like, what the visuals look like when this music is being heard, and that's valuable. That's very valuable. That's insight. But if the character's like taking a sword out and killing a vicious beast, from Shadow of Mordor or from Mordor or whatever, if you think you're catching it, you're completely misunderstanding what a game music, how it functions, other than cinematics, which are scored to pictures.
Right.
But I as far as getting builds of the game, very, very rarely does that occur. Especially in AAA games, they're very nervous about letting the game out of the, into the wild, in case, they have some pissed off contractor decides to release the game early, after they got fired or whatever. I don't know. I mean, anything so that's not very common. It has happened a couple of times. And bear in mind, there's, composers can be put into many different categories, but one of them is in-house composer, someone who is a employee of the studio with games being made. And then there's contracted composers. I'm a contracted composer. So I'm brought in. I'm not an employee of the company. I'm a paid contractor who's, essentially providing music assets to the game. So I'm not going into a office. If you were going in the studio, that's where you can play the game. 9 times out of 10, the studio that I'm working with is not in the same town even or city. There are some, not even sometimes they're in a different part of the world.
Right.
So you are not, if it's local, I live in Los Angeles. If it's local, then you can go into the studio and you can play the game and get a sense of it, which is quite useful. Yeah. But I'm used to working without that. So I mean, it's obviously been successful enough. So and you're also provided usually early on in terms of inspiration, a script. Very often, if there's a story, and a script is useful to see how the story unfolds and what happens, and kind of have a sense of that. And you're also provided with artist renditions of what the world looks like. That usually comes before gameplay, because they're basically experimenting and kind of creating the world, visually through artists, who are doing, here's what this area looks like, and then they have to imitate it or recreate it when they start making the game. So that's how I work.
And then you also worked on all the Bioshocks. You worked on the Shadow of War, Shadow of Mordor. So as you progress,
all 3 Bioshocks, Bioshock 1, Bioshock 2, and Bioshock Infinite.
And so as you progress through those, they continually hired you. Was there any time whenever, like, you've continually been hired for a certain, I guess, IP, did they ever like start to trust you with sending builds, or was that always just like you're not an in-house, so they just was very unsure about sending you anything like that?
I mean, I don't know if it's. I don't feel like they didn't trust me or did trust me. It just wasn't the way they worked with contractors. So, so no, I did not build to the game.
Okay.
And I don't know that the music would have been any better or any different.
Right.
I'm actually quite used to having gameplay footage. I find that to be very useful. And also, and beyond that, you are having conversations with the team, and you're talking about what's going on and how the music should function and what it should sound like, and anything that may be obvious when you're watching the footage. Like, okay, here's a combat cue, but here's a backstory related to this combat cue. You need to understand this because this has a emotional storyline connected to it. And so that also is super valuable. So you're in constant contact with, it could be an audio director, or in AAA games, sometimes they have music directors, someone whose function is just to implement and direct the music. And often those are composers themselves who are providing additional music, like on Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War. Nathan Griggs was the music director, and he wrote a lot of music as well. So,
yeah. Whenever you're doing writing for, just anything, whenever there's like the blend of electronics and contemporary, like traditional music, because I know that's been kind of the more modernized sound of soundtracks is, implementing a lot more electronics and everything. Is there whenever it comes to projects, is there a route that's more creatively freeing for you as opposed to like if they were to ask you to do just like a completely kind of traditional score without not a whole lot of electronics, as opposed to that combined with the electronics? Is there one of the two that's like more freeing for you personally, or are they both about the same for you?
I don't know if either one is more freeing. They are somewhat different.
Mhm.
I've done many scores that are just orchestral, like purely orchestral, and a lot that have added electronic elements. And it might not even be synthesizers. It might be taking the samples, and sample to anybody who's listening. A sample is a recording of a orchestral instrument that is then um, put into software that can be triggered
Mhm.
by the software. Contact is one of the most well known, and so, but they sound like orchestral, yeah, or a real instrument. It's not electronic, and then you mess with them electronically. You can digitize aspects of them, and you can do things that really change the way they sound. And that could be to your advantage, So no, I don't necessarily have a preference. I would say I come from an orchestral background, and
Mhm.
most of my scores are orchestral. And I do prefer to write orchestral music, but orchestral music with added synth elements is, I mean, people still like act as if, adding, it's revolutionary. They're adding synthesizers to orchestra. Well, we've been doing that for 30 years,
Yeah.
okay, or more. So there's nothing new. It's actually kind of an old style. It's
Mhm.
really nothing new about it. But there are always new synthesizer sounds, and
Mhm.
and a synthesizer, just, you could think about it. If you think of the orchestra as like the strings, woodwinds, brass, percussion, you could think about synthesizer as just another section of the orchestra.
Mhm.
So that it's definitely a very um, important tool that we have, because it's such a cool thing, and when it's right, and you need to use it. But sometimes there are just a pure orchestral approach is like, yeah, that's the ticket.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I'm an orchestral composer. If someone wanted someone who was to do like a synth gig, I'd say, you know what, I'm probably not your guy.
Mhm.
Probably want to find someone who does synth, because earlier in my career I would have been, I'll take anything.
Yeah.
But not anymore. And now I don't have to do that, number one. And number two is, it doesn't interest me as much. I don't want to suggest that people who write synthesizer scores, you know, it's not challenging. It's super challenging,
Mhm.
but it's not. I'm a sort of traditional composer, you know,
Mhm.
and so just to write sort of ambient sounds and create sort of ambient um, montage or whatever, it's not particularly interesting to me. I've done it. I've
Right.
done it.
Mhm.
I don't find that really fun or fascinating.
Mhm.
So I don't want to do them anymore. And I'm have enough work, and I've been doing this for enough years that
Mhm.
I can say no to stuff that I don't want to do. I don't need the money. I'm financially independent, so I don't have to do whatever comes my way if
Mhm.
it doesn't appeal to me, if it doesn't feel like a good fit. So I'm fortunate in that sense. I
Mhm.
wasn't always that way. When I first
Right.
started, scored anything, you
Mhm.
name it, because you're pretty desperate when you're first starting your
Exactly. Yeah. I am in that phase where, it's still the kind of I'll take anything at this point, as of
yeah,
right now, but
absolutely.
that's just, that's just kind of how it is in the industry, especially these days. I don't know if it's necessarily harder to get into the industry now. I know that it's a lot more of an even playing field, I would say, with, access to technology and everything. But it's definitely m- more people can definitely get into it, I feel like, these days, and so more people will be willing to take anything. So I feel like people might be a little bit more picky these days with who they can hire because there's just so many people um, in the industry. But yeah, that's it's really interesting thought. Whenever I want to go to Bioshock, and I don't want to like talk about it too much because I'm sure you get it all the time because I mean it's an incredible game and the music is fantastic. But whenever you were asked to do Bioshock 1, I can't imagine playing Bioshock 1 and enjoying it as much at all if it didn't have your music. Because and anytime I'll play it, it's not necessarily like a nostalgia thing, but anytime I boot it up, because I have the remasters, I have the trilogy, I have them all on the 360. So I've played it multiple times, and anytime, for example, I get that intro, just it's goosebumps every time. Same for like Cohen's masterpiece, Welcome to Rapture, all of it. Just anytime I play it, and I was wondering how did you get to that point of making the sound for Bioshock 1? Because it's it's got like, the orchestral elements, but it's not as traditional as some people might think orchestral music sounds, if that makes any sense. Um, it's a really unique sound, and I'm curious as to how you approached Bioshock.
Well, when I first started working on it, the audio director, Emily Ridgway, said
Mhm.
the score shouldn't sound like any other film, television, or game score.
Mhm.
It should be completely unique.
Mhm.
Of course, when you hear that, you go, well, what the hell is it going to sound like?
Exactly.
What the fuck?
That's so
Um,
intimidating.
it is intimidating, but it actually was ultimately inspiring, after you get past like what the hell am I going to do?
Mhm.
And so I tried to create something, and you know, it's not the kind of it's not like every project wants you to break all the molds and do
Mhm.
something completely unique. In fact, that would be a mistake. But it was the kind of game because it was so interesting and bizarre, and
Mhm.
you're in undersea city and you're going through, and splicers are attacking you left
Yeah.
and right, and all this crap's going on, and and you had this sort of Ayn Rand storyline infused, dystopian world. So it had all the things that you could do something different, because it was, and at the time it was a pretty different. I don't think there was anything quite like you. Because I have this Google search term for Bioshock in the news that sort of comes up.
Mhm.
So I look at it, and there's tons of games that are described as Bioshock-like. They're like
Oh,
Bioshock.
there's a lot of them these days.
Yeah. So it is sort of an iconic, touchstone. But so it gave me the opportunity to do some very different things, and I've done some interviews that talk about the different approaches I did. Obviously, there's sort of traditional orchestral. There's 20th century, kind of like Welcome to Rapture that you might think of as,
Mhm.
Shostakovich or Prokofiev or Bartok-ish.
Right.
Not, those are great composers, but so that may be inspired by that. And that was part of my idea that it was an intellectual. There was this intellectual because Andrew Ryan and Ayn Rand, and there was sort of the artist was at the center of all this. With those, I thought, okay, that's part of it. And then there's also what's a style that the French developed after World War II called um, um, musique concrète,
Mm.
concrete music, which literally took the sounds of the everyday world and made montages out of sound. So you could have a sound of a car and a sound of a glass breaking on the ground,
Right.
someone yelling, and all these different sounds that weren't necessarily musical, and they made a montage out of them. And so I infused some of the cues with those elements. They weren't, so I took like sounds of people, you know, people's voices that I found on like freesound.org, which is an
Mhm.
interesting website for anybody. You can go to freesound.org,
Mhm.
and the sound is free to use.
Shout out.
And different sounds of like for some of the percussion, I used machines because especially like in on the level, um, I forget how to pronounce it, but there's the machine level.
Yeah.
And so I used machines to do percussion instruments, So I infused it with that. And then I also used this technique called aleatoric. And
Mm.
aleatoric
Yeah.
is mid 20th century. People think, oh, that's really modern. It's actually been around since 1950. It's been around for like
That's a lot.
70 years, so
Yeah.
it's not that new. I mean, think about Buddy Holly. Buddy Holly was writing songs back then.
Mm-hmm.
But in any event, it's very dissonant. You're actually asking the players to improvise within certain, you know, defined techniques that you're and within certain parts of the register and whatever, and it creates a very eerie, scary effect, which
Mm-hmm.
helped define how scary and dark and eerie and etc. this world was. So it was by combining all this. So I had the brief of like, do something different,
Mm-hmm.
dude.
Yeah.
Don't make it sound like Star Wars or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and make it sound, give it a unique vibe. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was how I got there. And it just was just time experimentation, sending stuff to Emily and having her approve, say, yeah, that's the right direction. Yeah. Oh, wow. We love that. That's
Mm-hmm.
great. Or no, that's not working. Let's try something. That give and take is always present in
Mm-hmm.
just about every creative scoring situation. I mean, if you're doing a television show and it's like season 6, probably you're not doing that anymore. You have something, you're just doing it, and you're probably not even getting much feedback. It's like, yeah, that score is fine, thank you. But when you're doing something unique, then it's always give and take. What about this? Let's try that, and you change things and you delete things and
Mm-hmm.
start again and whatever. So and that's fun. That's challenging. That's really interesting work.
Mm-hmm. I did have a quick question about the transition from those games to Infinite, because Infinite is a lot more. There's a lot more. I feel like religious almost influence in the music. Like for example, whenever you shoot up into the clouds, not to spoil too much of the game, but whenever you shoot up to the clouds, there's like a kind of detuned piano that, like, whenever I stereotypically think of a church piano, that's like the exact sound that I think of. And so I was wondering how you transition from those games to that, because it's a similar sound, but it's also not. It's a really good transition. So I was wondering how you did that.
But the creative director for the original Bioshock is Ken Levine.
Hmm.
And Ken did. Then I worked on Bioshock 2, and Ken was not involved in Bioshock 2. Worked with a different team. But then Ken was the creative director,
Hmm. Hmm.
of Bioshock Infinite. And he was very clear that he wanted the score to not sound like Bioshock 1. And Bioshock 2 was in the same style as Bioshock 1, which made sense because it was still down in Rapture and just sort of really kind of revisiting that same world. So this was in the clouds, as you well know,
Hmm.
and a different time and whatever. There are parallels to Bioshock,
Hmm.
original Bioshock, a bunch of different things that are similar, but so he wanted a different sound. So that was what inspired me to go in that direction. It was like, yeah, we want something different. So it was definitely, and it was an Americana vibe in 1912.
Hmm.
And I used things like Stephen Foster, who was a famous songwriter of the American songbook in the 1800s, like I Dream of Jeannie, and
Hmm.
other famous songs from that period. So those were my inspirations. So that's how I got there, because that made sense, and they asked for it. So
Hmm. Yeah, that's super cool. That's something I always really liked, and I believe the song is "Lighter Than Air." I believe is what it's called. It's after you get baptized, technically,
right.
and then you descend into the city to actually walk around it. I feel like there are two moments in Infinite where it's like kind of an impact moment. I guess the phrase I would use, because in Bioshock 1, it's whenever you're going down the bathysphere. For 2, it's whenever you're kind of walking onto that ledge, and then you can kind of see the city. And then in this one, I feel like it's whenever you shoot up into the clouds, and then that moment. Um, and I thought it was really cool that in the music, there's like this really, really beautiful, melody being played over it, because the city, it looks nice, it's not, super dark or scary looking like, Bioshock and Rapture. But it's a lot more, kind of Yeah, the skies is kind of golden. It's a lot more pretty, and throughout the
Yeah,
entire thing, you
there's
have
nothing obvious that's scary at that
yeah,
point.
exactly. And
It's
then
actually, it's like it's fantastic. It's like you night
exactly,
people are tipping their hat to you and
it's like wow,
walking
this is so much different from my entrance in
rolling.
Rapture.
There's nothing wrong here, but there is.
Yeah.
And so you're right. That's exactly how that music functioned. I wrote a melody that was inspired by Stephen Foster, not any specific melody, but the songs that he wrote. That was sort of like, I'm going to write something kind of like optimistic, Stephen Fostery, and then underneath it is this sort of chromatic, kind of niggling, crawling, creepy vibe, and that was what I was going after, and that
it came across. It came across well. Yeah, that was really cool. That's one of the coolest. I would say one of the coolest, like storytelling. All of it's storytelling, but one of the coolest like storytelling moments in the music. I'd say for that game, because it's just so cool. It's just so cool. It's awesome.
Well, thank you very much, Carson.
Of course. Well, I will let you go now because I will keep going for hours because I do have a lot of questions and
All right, we can do it again sometime. Let's talk in 6 months or a year or something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, pleasure speaking with you. Will you send me a link when you finally put this up?
Of course, yeah. I will probably. I'm gonna work on it a lot today. So honestly, it'll be done. Today or tomorrow at some point, maybe.
All right, cool. Send me a link to it. I'd like to hear it. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Bye-bye.